So we'll be touching on a broad range of issues surrounding the curation and representation of African arts in Western museums and galleries. We all know how rich and diverse African art is, and the very rich cultural heritage we have through our art. But oftentimes we know that in Western museums, they are limited in terms of how they are represented, mostly through colonial perspectives. And sometimes you see that there's a lack of diverse voices. Today, we are fortunate to have a distinguished panel of experts who will explore with us the evolving landscape of African visual art in this 21st century by sharing their own personal works, their own personal experiences, engaging in this space. Our discussion will delve into how museums are moving beyond traditional narratives to showcase the dynamism and the depth of African art across the continent. We'll also explore how curators are engaging in collaborative practices with artists back in Africa, with scholars, trying to engage all of these different voices. And another interesting thing I'll also bring up is the issue of restitution, which is like a very popular debate we have now. And also like innovative ways museums are trying to address many issues that we see and in representation of African art. So without further ado, let's welcome our esteemed panelists. I'm really, really excited and honored that they could join us today and share their opinions on this topic. So now I would hand it over to Noah, who will be reading their bios, a short biography of our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bukunmi, for posting this up. And I want to apologize for the background noise you might be hearing. I couldn't make it on time to my office, so I had to look for a coffee shop where I could just quickly attend to today's event. So I'm going to be reading the profile of the panelists for today, and I'm going to be starting with Adewale Adenle. Adewale Adenle blurs boundaries among the visual arts and other fields of study to create bodies of three-dimensional paintings that explore dual realities and logics in cultural, political constructs and systems. Within these dualities, he introduces slippages between objects, forms, and their context to deconstruct dominant socio-political norms and historical narratives. His paintings and drawings are critically grounded on intentional interdisciplinarity, and they invite viewers to upload and search for multiple logics in their interpretations. Adenle has exhibited his paintings and drawings on 3 continents and has taught visual arts in several universities and K-12 programs in the US. Between 1986 and 2007, his works on critical aesthetics and political satire were published daily in various newspapers in Nigeria, the UK, and the US, culminating in the publication of his book, Mixed Feelings, which documents his cartoons and illustrations on socio-political concerns across the globe. Adenle was a recipient of the 2000 Reuters Foundations Award in the UK, 2021 Robert and Phyllis Eales Award from the Center for the Study of Religion at the Ohio State University, and the 2022 Benetta Jules Roosevelt Doctoral Award from the Association of Africanist Anthropology, a section of the American Anthropology Association. He also has worked on several public projects, including the towering murals for the Philadelphia International Airport and Aurora Community Center, and the bronze sculpture entitled Congo Square, which is installed in Louis Armstrong's Park in New Orleans. Adenle obtained his MA in Museum Studies in 2021, and 2012, he received his MFA in Painting and Drawing. He is currently a PhD student in Arts Administration, Education, and Cultural Policy at the Ohio State University. Thank you, Adenle, for joining us. You're welcome. I'm going to be reading the next panelist profile. Jumbe Sebunya. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. Jumbe recently retired from a long career in humanitarian assistance with organizations such as the UN, Save the Children Fund, the African Medical Research Foundation, Care and Child Fund International. During the last 10 years, he served as East and Southern Africa, as well as West Africa Regional Director for Child Fund International. His entire career was focused on the African continent, and in particular, on improving the livelihoods of the most marginalized communities in both rural and urban settings. Throughout his time living and working on the African continent and beyond, the resilience and sheer innovative power of individual lives and the adaptation to often very challenging circumstances stood out to him. He became interested, particularly in the work of artists and designers he encountered in the many African capital cities he worked in and visited. He watched in awe at how many of them built traction for their creation, both in Africa and across the globe, thereby really shifting the often negative narrative about the continent of Africa. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm going to the next panelist, Anja Sebunya. Anja recently returned to Atlanta after 3 years of working in Dakar, Senegal. Anja is originally German. Her parents were global nomads and so spent her childhood and adolescence between India and Pakistan. As an adult, she has lived and worked in the UK, France, Uganda, Kenya, Mozambique, Burkina Faso, Ghana, and Senegal. Anja and family moved to Atlanta in 2007. They quickly decided this vibrant and cosmopolitan city would be a good long-term home. Anja has always been interested in themes of migration, notions of home, belongings, and fusion of cultures. She is a closet writer and art collector, connector of people and ideas, and an avid shopper with a great eye for the unusual. Opening Akazi ATL is a long-term dream from which she hopes to situate and realize her many passions and interests. Thank you very much for joining us, Anja. I am really excited to be here and to learn from you. I'm going to hand it over to Bukunmi.
Thank you, Ma, for the introduction, for introducing our panelists. And yeah, so the way I will structure the panel is I will ask a couple of general questions from everyone first, and then I would ask specific questions based on your expertise. I'll ask Wale, and then I'll ask Anja and Jumbe together. So the first question, the first general question, we always talk about how we need to reframe narratives when it comes to African arts representation in Western museums, going beyond, the traditional colonial tropes. What's your take on this? How far gone do you think? How far do you think we've gone in moving beyond these traditional ideas, these traditional narratives? And if you could also share examples from your experience, from your curatorial work, or your experience going to other galleries and museums in the United States, outside of the United States. Yeah, that's the first question. And you can also look at it on the screen if you just need to go back to it. Thank you. I'll start with Anja.
I think the needle is being moved slowly but surely, with more artists and academics and thinkers from the continent being able to, tell the story, shift the narrative. I think what's particularly interesting in many institutions is the pairing of material objects to modern and contemporary art practice. So speaking for the museums here in Atlanta, it seems that they have to work around, you know, the big challenge of many of their collections have been donated. So there's no easily discerned through line of these objects. So then, you know, I'm thinking of Lauren Tate Baeza in the High Museum. She has, you know, a huge collection that is donated, and she's trying to, you know, define, you know, what stories the museum can tell. So she has a huge collection from Nigeria. So she's connecting the material objects with the modern postmodernists, you know, like the Bruce show she did. So those are all very interesting movements, I think, in shifting that. Of course, you know, cities like New York are far ahead of Atlanta, and, you know, we've all gone to their wonderful museums, and they've shifted in who are the gatekeepers of telling the stories. So these are all very positive movements. In terms of galleries, focusing here on Atlanta, there's still very little exposure of modern contemporary art from the African continent and even the diaspora. So there's, I mean, personally, I think that it's something also to do with, you know, how Atlanta was defined at a time by the civil rights movement, which was very Pan-Africanist in outlook. And that sort of interest and general overarching framework is no longer in place. And so that like also needs shifting back to, you know, a more global perspective. And that's what we're also trying to do at Akazi. And I think Jumbe can speak to that part as well. As
thank you,
African
Anja.
himself. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's very profound. Yeah, I like that you said that there are actually shifts happening, and, you know, talking about different cities and the different levels of progress that have been experienced. Yeah, maybe Jumbe can just add to that.
Yes, thank you very much for having me on this panel. I think the shift is also being influenced by the technology we have in terms of the previous gatekeepers of different museums are being broken and being sort of accessing the different social media, for example, has enabled a number of African artists as well as diaspora to expose their work directly to the clients and directly to the different audiences within the world. And that definitely has made a big impact on those who used to control who exposes, who has the right to exhibit in different museums, and also made them aware that there is an interest, an increasing interest in ensuring that the previous focus on colonial and post-colonial kind of artwork has to change, because there is an incredible opportunity for us to expose a much higher grade of work than what we've been showing previously. So that kind of impacted the different interest in the artwork which we are exposing, which we are sort of showing around the world. And globally, the technology has made it much easier. We can now be able to, through social media, directly connect to the people in Burkina Faso, a country which sort of sometimes, you know, when you talk to people about Burkina Faso, say, oh, where is that? Oh, Ivory Coast. Oh, no. Is it Senegal? No. Somewhere in West Africa, but it's a very important kind of source of artwork as well. The other one which has sort of made it easier now is that the gatekeepers are also changing. It's no longer sort of being controlled by Western or Northern-based academics, or indeed art musician or museum directors, but also some of those museums are attracting and recruiting some of our very own experts from Africa to undertake some of the work which is being sort of shown within the museums. And their interest is also sort of being exposed to the different post-colonial traditional narratives and looking at more differently than what we have at the moment. So in a way, that has been sort of, you can see that in the recruitment of museums, in some of the museum directors, where they're looking at exposure of High Museum from Lorraine, who has been having examples of work in different countries in Africa. Her interest is more broader than interest of just looking at the traditional artwork, which we used to have. And so you are looking at a very different kind of group, which is expanding its interest in different artwork than what we had traditionally. But also the fact that we are forced by the fact that, the African artwork is changing. It's the young artists who are absolutely, you can't place them anywhere. You can't place them geographically. You say this is a Mozambican, or this is a Ghanaian, or this is a Nigerian, but you're looking at them and say, my gosh, this is a modernist artwork, beautiful pieces of work. And that has also been exposed, and there's sort of increased interest from the different social media that has exposed some of the artwork, which was previously, difficult to access to by the different groups within the continent. So all of those have made it easier for the African arts to be identified, to be exposed, to be marketed within the different setups.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jumbe, for those very salient and important points. I like the point of the gatekeepers, the role of the gatekeepers changing. And you actually already brought up something I was going to ask later on about technology and social media, democratizing access and exposure. Thank you so much for that. Wale, as an artist and as a scholar of African art, how do you see this reframing and representation? How do you see it come to play in your experience?
Good morning again. Thank you, Bukunmi. Thank you also for the comment made by the contributors. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, just
very well.
Sure. First of all, let me thank you for one word that you use that makes me happy when you say how far gone are we in moving beyond traditional colonial. You see the word traditional and colonial, how you put those two together, kind of, I cringe a little bit, I have to confess, because I don't want us to go away from traditional, but I want us to go away from colonial. And this is where we've been having one or two issues when it comes to African representation, or the representation of Black art or African art in the 21st century. And the other thing I like about this, I have to commend you for using the word 21st century rather than using contemporary and modern, which I've always been. There's been a kind of dichotomy, which to me, when it comes to African art, should not be necessary. What is contemporary today will be traditional tomorrow. What has been, what is traditional today was once contemporary and modern. And using the century rather than that makes me feel more happy with the concept of this discussion. First, I thank you for that, and I also thank Jumbe and Anja for their contribution. Amazing. I mean, you've touched on everything that I thought I could touch on, and it really signified. Now, we talked about the shift on that. When we talked about the shift from colonial narrative, yes, we started seeing that because there's been a kind of intervention coming from many curators, maybe most of who are from African origin. I mean, people who really came directly from Africa to probably study here, or actually intervening from indigenous land in Africa. So that has been coming up, and but I have to say that the shift has been very, it's long overdue, and it's so slow. And the reason I think why it's so slow is because I think there's this what we call the pedagogy of display, and the politics of interpretation, which to me sometimes eliminate the indigenous concept or the reason for the creation and actually in-depth study of these objects, because it is very difficult to interpret or to represent objects that were created. They were created not for art purpose. When they were creating it, they didn't even mean it to be art. So when we bring it into the concept of art, we kind of change the aesthetics appreciation of the aesthetics. And when we now aestheticize it, we now determine who now has to determine what aesthetics are we using when we use line shapes and all that. We are also defining the designable features, formal elements. And we all know that most African, especially traditional spiritual one that we are curating today, were not created for that. The lines can be there. It fits into Western perspective. But the main interpretation right there is inside the object, is the creation, is the wood that was used, is the clay that was used, is the reason, is what really launched this creativity into being. All those are the real interpretations. So in my dissertation, what I emphasized was to create a different form of interpretation. I call it ICEP, Indigenous Contest Engagement Paradigm, which talks more about how these objects are supposed to be created beyond their visual elements, which we seems to be. And I try to put it this way. When we see that, when we interpret the way we continue to interpret it, we're actually not interpreting, we are describing, there's a description and interpretation. When we see the lines, when we see the objects, when we see the shape, we are describing. But that is not interpretation. And that's what I said. It's talking about, and it's perfectly good because most of the curators came from the artistry background. And when you study art history, there's this author that most art historians have to go through, Erwin Panofsky. Most of them have to, it talks about iconography and all that they need to observe critically. But those all only work for work of art that have been produced as work of art. And then when we start to continue to use that, we are not really digging deep into what I think should be the core interpretation. And sometimes I look at it as the methodology too. The methodology of investigating this thing could be a little bit subjective or suspicious. Reason is that when we go into African communities, even with these people getting in, and we use different academic Western methodology to investigate it. Remember, I think it was Jumbe that mentioned the idea of identifying with the communities and coming from Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal and all that.
Yeah.
The thing is that if we go in there with Western methodology, we go to a community that are historically marginalized. There's this suspicion of that era of slavery, era of coloniality. There's still this suspicion there. So when we now come with that methodology that is still Western, we don't seem to get the details or a depth of narrative that could help in articulating our viewpoints or our narratives or our interpretation of those objects. So I think the methodology also needs to change. And rather than using portraiture methodology, for instance, to investigate African traditional objects, indigenous methodology will have been good. because indigenous
Interesting.
methodologies come with the 5 R's: respect, relationality, relativity, reciprocity, and relevance. The 5 R's are very important for you. Once they say that you are coming from that perspective that you want to respect them, they will definitely be open to giving all this information that they, but when we go with some of these methodologies that are talking about, oh, the researcher is actually a little bit more superior to the person that is giving information, then you get the information that you want to get, but not really fully authentic, or let me use that word. And then those are the things we publish, and we kept on recycling in our historical books. So I definitely agree with the two early speakers that talks about we engaging with the community, but how do we engage? The engagement needs to be to contain that 5 R's that I mentioned. And that definitely will help us to advance this narrative better. I mean, I think I will stop that for now.
Yes, thank you. That's very, very detailed. And I think one thing I noticed from what you said is that sort of like a distinction ought to be made between traditional objects. I know in your work you refer to them as subjects even from heart. I think that's something where the kind of thread I'm seeing. And also like the methods that we need to approach these objects using African indigenous philosophies to interrogate it. But I think one question I should ask now I'll ask Anja first. Do you think traditional, not, I don't want to use the word colonial, like Wale said, traditional African object art, do you think they should be displayed in museums?
That's a tough question.
Yes.
That's a tough one.
Yes. You see, originally I'm from Berlin, and we have the now infamous Humboldt Forum there that went through 5 curators, all of whom, it was a lot of turbulence, and it was all about how do we display these, I mean, for lack of a better word, these are looted objects, right? And how do we display them in context? And I don't know, I didn't delve into it very deeply, but I don't think they even asked the question, should they even be displayed in a European, setting? So that's a question that definitely needs answering. Yesterday, Jumbe and I were at a gallery talk at the Carlos Museum, where one of the finalists for the African art curator for the museum was given a gallery talk. And that collection is a small, also donated, collection of traditional material objects. And when I asked him, because there was a discussion on, do these objects, do they need to have a label next to them? And I asked him, I said, so how do you work around, how these things are often displayed where like it says in the credits, it's anonymous or artist unknown. And I thought his answer was very elegant and also impactful, because he said, the context from which these objects have come are often not contexts where the artist is, the maker of the object is upheld as like an individual, and there isn't that sense of like me, the artist, creates, right? It's a communal effort. The object is part of a communal practice, so it would be wrong to attribute it to an individual. It belongs to a community. So I think, long story short, that given that it's going to take a time still for these objects to be restituted to their rightful owners, and rather than them being put in storage, I do think there's a place for them to be displayed as part of storytelling about a different past, and certainly a different future that I think the world needs, and that people in the diaspora are busy drafting, right? Like there are many interpretations of what Afrofuturism is, but the one that resonates with me is like, crafting a future that's based on in part ancient ways of being that worked very well, and can these be extrapolated into the future? So in the context of this kind of storytelling, and always in connection to new works of art and thinking.
Thank you. Jumbe, do you have something to add to that?
It's a very, very tricky and absolutely relevant question and issue. But I think one other area which I would highlight is the promotion of cross-cultural understanding, and how critical it is that some of these museums could really channel their sort of mission to be more educational and appreciation of what other communities have been, instead of looking at it from a colonial perspective only, in terms of showing the negativity of some of the objects, and also titling or naming some of those objects in a very, very colonial, traditional way, narrative. Those could be changed and engaged more. How do you engage the museums and the communities to appreciate more understanding of different cultural values and different cultural entities that we have within the world? So I'll look at it more in terms of it's very important that some of these objects could be shown in order to promote cross-cultural learning, but definitely continue the discussions on whether they belong to those very museums which receive donations from looted items from other countries, and whether or not we can sort of meanwhile make sure that those items are returned to their functional place where they are made by the communities themselves. It's a very, very tricky question, and it's a very important one for us to continue discussing.
Yes, I really like that. Like, in the meantime, the purpose should be educational and foster cross-cultural learning. Thank you. Wale, do you think these objects belong in a museum? I know that's a big question for you.
Yeah, there are some of them that are not supposed to be shown at all. If we are going to respect the culture they came from, and if we look at some of those objects that were like it was said, Anja said, for lack of a better word, looted. I like that. So if we look at that, we will look at how they got here. When we look at this Presbyterian bishop, Shepherd, who went into African shrine and pull out the mask without a masquerade and brought them down because they look sculptural. And sometimes you can say, okay, some of the spirit has been disassociated from the object, so they can now longer become potent and all that. Whether they are potent or not, that's another thing. We can talk about potency of those, but we are talking about how do we look at, how do we put it out there? And if we should put it out there simply because we wanted to disrespect or respect the culture or the individual or the identity, because it's an identity of a community of people, so many people like that. So you don't. So we have to ask why some of them should not be displayed, and how some of them should be displayed, because it's not just why they should not be displayed, but it should also be the one that they will be displayed. How are they going to be displayed? How are they going to be exhibited in museums? If I've seen a situation where the people display the, let's say the paraphernalia of Obatala using a gray or black or kind of background, and they put a shoe, Elegbara symbol on the white background. I mean, or they merge it together. If you are going to display in contest, we have to really consider how this is being done in traditional indigenous society. And you can only get that through oral history rather than the history that we continue to project in when it comes to historical perspective. And also, I agree that also we should, for cross-cultural learning, we should try as much as possible to display some of them. And if we are learning and we are learning something negative, like we're actually learning something that is lies that have been torn
perpetrated.
So the learning part of it is very critical. I mean, I'm a professor at Georgia State University, and when I bring African objects, I wanted my students to learn from it, to use it for recontextualization, especially in this time of Afrofuturism, like was said by Anja. So we definitely need to know what we are presenting to them and what they are learning, and how they recontextualize it will depend on the information that was given to them. Like, for instance, Oro deity in Yoruba land, Oro is simply Aiwo. Whenever they bring Oro out, they kept on
supposed to look at it.
Aiwo, that we're not supposed to see. It's simple. And then how do we now display Oro? Then people came up with so many sculptural things that in the Magbo headdress, for instance, they use it to display Oro to do that. But how do we even do it also without contravening certain section of American Constitution, which cannot eliminate or exclude gender from viewing certain objects, because women are not supposed to see Oro. We are going to be contravening the Constitution, and we're going to be disrespecting the culture if so we are in a kind of debacle. So those are some of the concerns needs to, and I said indigenous context engagement paradigm discusses that in my dissertation, and I've presented it at different forums. So there's a very, very important thing that we need to look at, like the communal practice that Anja talked about is very, very important. The communal practice, it's something that we need to deeply look into whenever we're going to see whether we're going to display it. Because when she says communal practice, she's not just talking about the individual, the human beings that participated in the process of making that art or that object. It includes the spirit, the Ifa divination, the divination process, that launches this. It includes so many other things. That's the communal thing. So they have to look deeper into it for us to now know whether they should be displayed. And when we now display there, we put labels and all that. Like, for instance, I've been to a lot of museums where you put Egungun regalia on the wall, and they'll say Egungun masquerade. It's not a mask. Number one, I detest this idea of calling a Google masquerade. It's not a masquerade. It's not Mardi Gras India. They say no. So I just call it a Google is a Google. But when you put the regalia on the wall, it's not a masquerade. It's not. It has to be in motion for it to become a Google. A Google regalia, a Google whatever. There are so many ways to present these things that will show more respect and more knowledge and more learning to the people.
Thank you. Thank you.
One area which I didn't hear is the commercial side, because somehow, if displayed, then some of those communities from where it comes, the items are coming from, should be compensated. If the museums are taking every day from public, enter and see some of these items, then the community should be able to share some of that, and those discussions need to be
profits. Need to be there. Yeah,
I think that's very critical, but I wanted to say something about that. I think you're going to talk about repatriation and restitution.
Yes, I think we can.
So
just
that's
talk
why
about it.
I still want to
keep it. Yeah, I think we can actually just talk about restitution already. Yeah.
We can? Okay,
yeah,
well.
We can already.
Shall I go ahead or will?
Yes, of course.
You
can go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. If I tell you one thing that we have a group of curators and all that talks about this, and I'm one of those that it's presently against the way African objects are being returned to Africa at the moment. And immediately I mentioned that, people think, oh, why? Yes, I want African objects to go back to where they come, but not in this manner. And I have so many stories to tell. There were some objects that were returned to the Congo in the 70s during the time of Mobutu Sese Seko. More than 400, and those objects found their way back to the West. These objects have been there since the 19th, 20th century. And then this museum made so much money out of it. I am against restitution or repatriation without reparation. When you send this work back without actually creating an enduring an environment for them to stay, you are actually setting them up for failure. Perhaps the only one I've so far loved was the one that has been done in Benin, not the country of Benin, but the Benin Kingdom. And though that causes a lot of quarrel between the king, Oba of Benin, and of course the governor of Benin, of Edo State. And the issue is this: before these objects were sent back, they engaged the service of so many intellectuals, so many curators, including Chika Okeke Agulu at Princeton University. And they were able to put some money into it to fund a museum right next to the King Palace.
Yeah.
I mean, they're building the museum. It's amazing. So now we have a place where they're going to return it to, and they're not even returning it to the government of Nigeria. They are returning it to the community, the culture, which was taken from.
Yeah.
So that means a lot, because government, Nigerian government or any other government doesn't produce art. They don't produce art. So when you send it back to them, one way or the other, that thing will get back to
find its way back.
and it will develop legs and all that and come back. And so now that it's been with the custodian, the true custodian, the gatekeepers of these objects, like about Bini, I can at least be assured that to a large extent, this will be protected. And then they have the curators who will curate them. And it's the traditional curator, not just somebody who went through educational training and all that. This person really got engaged in traditional practice, religious practice and all that in combination with intellectual or academic or scholarly endeavors. And that to me works. But others where country negotiated it and they send everything back. No, if these people make so much money for the past 200, 300 years, at least a little should be invested in establishing. If they truly mean to send this back, we should fight for that repatriation, but we should also fight for reparation to come in.
That's such a great point. Yes, contributing to building structures in those communities where they can be returned to.
Training,
I'll just ask Anja
and all
to.
that,
I had a question. Yes. So I understand that it all makes a lot of sense. But what would Professor Wale say? Because Chimamanda gave a very good opening talk at the Humboldt Forum, and she specifically said, if someone gave me, you know, okay, let me remember what she said. If I wear a beautiful dress and then someone takes that dress from me and then doesn't want to give it back to me because they don't believe that I can wear it and keep it. And that logic is, you know, what is being used. It's like, oh, we can't give things back because they will be disappeared, they won't be curated, they will be, you know, whatever it is, they will be sold back. What do you say to the idea that that is not an argument for not returning these objects? It's just an excuse. And then I agree. A second question also of Professor Wale, because
just call me Wale.
Okay, Wale.
Yeah, that's
because we've all seen these Egungun masquerades that you know are in many museums, but is there not a part of the story that can be told about these types of objects in connection to the diasporic movement of African people? So you mentioned the Mardi Gras Indians in New Orleans. So these are not just, you know, some random costumes these people make up to prance about. There's a deep intentionality of how these, you know, whatever you want to call them, masquerades, costumes, you know, they come directly on a through line from, you know, where they came from as a people. So I think that's also important, like in storytelling of these material objects from the African continent. How do they manifest here in the quote unquote new world?
Okay. Thank you so much. That's a very powerful question. Those are powerful questions. The first thing is in interpreting or really respecting this subject, we tend to anglicize or turn it into English. And some of these, when you try to interpret something into English, you lose the main translation. And that's why the idea of masquerade, when we use masquerade in a context in Africa, we see it as something that is just not too serious. But when we call it a gungun, we all know it's a mask that is parading and dancing and doing all that.
Performing.
Yeah, performing. But it's more than that because it comes from Igbale to the outside world. Before it got to that outside land, there's a lot of spiritual preparation and all that. We call it Igbale. So that is the reason why when we're not making masquerade, it sounds like a mockery of the whole thing. Like, oh, it's just like how, yes, we all know that it's a mask and it parades, it performs, it all that. We call it masquerade in English. But in the traditional sense, it's a Google, it is whatever it is. When we now tend to translate it to that English, it seems to be reducing the strength or the importance of that, the significance of that subject or object in our community. So the word alone also is important. The language we use also is important. Just like what we used to, I don't know, I'm sure you are aware of the fact that they used to call it, the tradition I used to call it primitive. There are a lot of discussion about that to now change primitive to traditional. And now we were able to eliminate that primitive because these are some of the discussion that has been going on over the years in order to know how
fetish.
Yes, a fetish. So many things that we use. And now that's just about the issue of the first question was, okay, yes, Chimamanda Adichie, what she was saying was right. Museums should not use that reason that, oh, we don't know how to take care of it, to not return what they stole. They stole it. Return it to the owner. Simple. That's it. But the problem I'm saying is not that they should not return it. I'm saying that if we are asking them to return it, we should not just say, return this to us. We should say, you've made so much money out of it. I go to museum every day, every time. I pay a certain amount of money for the past few years. You've made so much money out of it. When you return it, you know why you're returning. You're returning it because you know that there's a way you're going to get it back. So you now use it as an excuse to say that, you see, they can't keep it. Now, because you already set it up for failure, you are going to get it back. You know how to. So if you want to return it, let us have a place. We're going to continue to ask you to at least invest in where it's going, especially now that these people that are going to receive it, most of them have become Christians and Muslims. Now we have to start identifying cultures and people that are now going to be taking care of those things, right? So in doing that, we have to pay them. We have to establish those structures. We have to do all those things that needs to come up. We don't have that money. Once we don't have money, when you send it back, one way or the other, we throw it back to you.
For profit.
We don't need it. They know that will happen. That's what I'm saying, that they should, yes, they should return it. I don't disagree with returning. I just, the mode of returning or the structure they put in place is what I'm worried about. And I feel it that we're going to still be sitting down in the next 200 years asking them to return it because they've taken it back again. So
it just keeps
like
and
I can't remember the second question. I don't know. I think you said something. The second question was about
no, you talked about, you know, the power of the, you know, the masquerading. Okay, I had asked about, you know, I mean, people who talk well about the Egungun, they very much say that, you know, this it's more than a mask. You know, they go into everything that you talked about. So what interests me is this practice, you know, showing up on the other side of the world through the trafficked human beings that took their culture, and it emerges in a different.
Yeah. I think that's you also talked about the Mardi Gras. I live in New Orleans for 10 years.
Yes.
And I know most of even Baba Tutu Montana and all that. I met with him before he passed.
Yes.
And I look at the way Mardi Gras India came up and how, yes, it's it came up in this culture. It's it's not a Google.
No.
He has his own kind of, I mean, because they speak English. If they call it masquerade, if they call it anything based on their language, I don't mind it, you know, because that's what it is. But if they call it Mardi Gras, India, masquerade, or anything, that's fine. I'm just saying that when you now compare that with the spirituality, process of spirituality engaged in making a gungun, it reduces that the intensity, the power of that Google in terms of the visuals when you see it. And many of them, actually, there's a curator in Virginia that you exhibited Egungun one time, and he actually put the Egungun in motion, even if it's just rolling and doing all those things. It's because the colors,
interesting,
the galia, everything now very important. They say a lot of things. The bird on the head of the mask, I mean, represent the and all that. So there are so many things that needs to be discussed on that. I just I don't want to go.
Yeah, I did have a lot of questions, but because of our time, we're supposed to finish by 12. I think we've covered, it's just an hour, and this is, already 12. I think we covered a lot of things I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask about digital technologies. I wanted to ask about the diaspora communities. I think I'll just ask you guys to just give your final thoughts, and I would see if people have questions before we leave. Is there any final thought you'd like to give concerning the future of curating African art in America and the West? Where do you see it going?
I would just say that I am very hopeful of it going in great directions when it's in the hands of new generation of people like yourself, Bukunmi. It's going to be in good hands, and I have no doubt that very, great strides will be made on all the subjects that we've touched on.
Thank you, Jumbe.
And I think the other one is going back to the technology. There's no way we could just think that technology won't have an impact on the way we look at some of these arts and the cultural kind of, impact on the diasporic communities as well as the African continent. And therefore, technology, we need to embrace it and see how we could really use it much more effectively in promoting the art and other cultural kind of values we have within the continent.
Very important. Thank you, Jumbe. Wale,
thank you very much. I think the collaboration with makers and traditional indigenous gatekeepers are very important. We don't have to bring them here. Technology can set in, and we can use technology to engage them, and they can tell us some more about, because doing my research, I was shocked to even discover. I mean, I lived in Africa, and I've been to 18 African countries. Then did some research in indigenous culture, and I'm always shocked every time I get engaged. Again, there's always something new. So it goes to show that there's a lot that still not have there.
It's always
So
evolving.
yes, Anja was correct to say, Bukunmi, yes, there are a lot of things, a lot of job work in your front, but it would be better done if we engage these makers, we engage the police, even through video. When they've done it in Indianapolis Museum of Art, we have to involve a lot of makers to get their idea about how certain objects should be placed, which one should be placed. And they did that so well. They brought the issue symbol out there to show that, okay, before you consult any other deities, you have to consult a shoe first. They make sure they cover the crown of a king. They don't put it on a steel. There's so many things they do because they were able, with that information, people who are recontextualizing those objects for academic, scholarly purpose, they have factual information. They're able to use that to develop everything, whatever the contemporary art they are producing. So that helps a lot. So collaboration with these people are very, very important. Not just rely on just our artistry. And also oral literature is very, very important. I kept on, that has been something that has not been well regarded in scholarly endeavors there. And that's why I think I told you, Bukunmi, that I don't usually use history in my writing. I call it orality, or because history is the story, is his own story, his story, the colonial story, the imperialist story. And they kept on, now we're changing it. We're trying to change it. I think emphasis on direct oral from the indigenous communities are very, very important to in that.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. This was very interesting. I hope everyone learned a lot.
Thank you very much.
Do we have anybody with questions from the audience? You can unmute and ask, or you could just type it in the chat. Or comments, questions or comments. Okay.
I guess we must have done badly. They don't have questions.
Oh, you have done well.
Yeah,
Clarified
I
a
can
lot of
ask
questions.
me,
yeah.
Can you hear me? I joined really late, and whenever I join meetings late, it's just like sometimes I don't know, but I caught the part of the conversation about the. It's always the point of conversation about the stolen art, and then the idea of returning. And even then, like what Anja said about taking works and then somewhat showing it on the other side. And there's this, for my research, pulling from the thread of concepts about how to properly curate museum is something that I am interested in. And one thing that I'm a firm believer of is then looking not to the West, but then to other parts of the world, like our affiliations with, let's say, Asian countries, for instance, or like even other parts. You were saying something about the Mardi Gras India, and based on this sort of different affiliations that are not Western centric, I was wondering, do you see some sort of revitalization coming from that angle? That sense of looking not to the West, but looking to other places. Because in my opinion, I think we have strong relationships with East Asia, for instance, that we have not explored in museological spaces. Even the idea of, also there's the idea of the Middle East, for instance, that we have yet to explore. I went to this museum in New York, and I could see them trying to draw a relationship between Egypt and Nubia, and then Nubia with some other whatever. So that all of that relationship that we have so left in the backdrop because of this constant emphasis on this West, how do you think we can turn away from the West and onto these other people, and what do you think it will do for us when we do that, if that makes sense?
Does anyone want to address that, looking beyond the West?
I can say a little bit about that. I think we have been doing that. I say that because if we look at it, for instance, if you're talking about the let's say the Yoruba art, for instance, we saw the way it's being recontextualized or repurposed, or I don't even know the way what I'll call it, in Brazil, because of the transatlantic slave trade. If you go to the whole the Bahia region of Brazil, it's you will see a lot of this happening. And of course, a real core Yoruba person will say, oh no, it's not the way we do it. It's not the way. No, we don't have to do. They don't have to do it the way we did it, because what they are doing is they are representing it. They are recontextualizing it in a way that suits them, but without disrespect to the culture, the original culture or the originating culture. So when you now see people talking about Yemoja, they call it Yemaya, they call it Bembe, they call it Jembe, and all that, we don't have to say, oh, they were wrong, but they are still speaking the traditional language that they came with. It's just that due to transatlantic slave trade and all that, things change. So, but we know that when they start worshiping or doing all these things, they still pay reverence to the Yoruba culture or to certain culture that it came from. So we do that. And when you talk about Mardi Gras India, the Mardi Gras India also has a lot of connection. I see Mardi Gras as a recontextualization of margin cultures, whether from Asia, from Europe, from America, from the indigenous Americans that were here. So that is a margin of forms. And I agree with you. Maybe we should start thinking about, okay, how is this beyond the West? But the idea is that we have all come to agree that in academic circle and even in museum and all, the Western doctrine has dominated the world. So we're trying to disentangle all these things and try to change that. From there, we can spread out into other international communities. I think that's probably,
Yeah, that's a good answer. Thank you. Jumbe, do you have anything to add to that? And then
I was just trying to say that I've got another meeting soon coming on.
Yes, we have to.
I think one of the things which we need to look at as well is that within the current context, I think definitely it's very critical that we do highlight some of those interests from Middle East as well as Asia. But I think it's much more complicated, and I think we haven't touched the element of the private sector. The private sector collection is also as critical as the museums, which we have seen around. And I think that is an area where we will find it much more complicated as collections taking place from Asia to West to East to Middle East are not managed very well. We haven't learned at all from what happened in the colonial period. We need to look at it more now in the private sector. What can we do what kind of structure can we establish to make sure that we manage the current commercial state of our, acquisitions within those communities. But it's very critical. But otherwise, other than that, I have another meeting very soon. I have to rush.
Yes, thank you, Jumbe. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, we'll just round up here. I really appreciate you coming and sharing your perspectives. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining. Yes, we would have this hopefully some other time, this kind of setting, and we do have conversations every 2 months. So if you'd like to sign up, I can always send you details. Wale and Jumbe. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend. Bye. Bye, Jumbe.
All right. Thank you, Bukunmi. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Yes, bye.